This is draft season. John Schmeelk, Tony Pauline with you. It's all brought to you by Moody's, a proud partner of the New York Football Giants. Thank you so much for being with us, everybody. Always good to talk to you. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at moodys.com. Tony, last week you put on your first mock draft since the All-Star games over at sportskita.com leading up to the NFL Combine. Before we get into the individual picks, we'll get into all 32 of them, and then we'll take your fan questions as well right here. What was the most difficult part of this for you doing your 2025 mock draft?
Probably limiting it to just two quarterbacks in the first round, because there's probably going to be three, maybe four quarterbacks selected in the first round. But I said when I did this, I'm just going to look at the team needs. I'm going to go best player available all the way through until I start to maybe get more news come Combine. That is there a team late in the first round, maybe the Rams, maybe the Lions, who are really heavily leaning towards taking a quarterback in the first round. So reducing the number of quarterbacks in the first round was difficult. You know, there's a lot of teams that need edge rushers. That's a top priority, and the edge rushers quickly came off the board. So I want to try and stay on my board, not make any crazy picks. So sometimes you have to go to what is perceived to be the second or third need, because that may be the best player on the board available when they are on the clock, per se.
Yeah, Tony, I got to imagine, because teams always will reach at the end of that first round. Another team will trade back in if they missed out on the first go-around on the quarterbacks. And then you have those, I think the other issue with this draft, you're right, certain positions are deep. So when do teams start attacking those deep positions, even though they know maybe later in the draft they can get a good player at that spot because the position is so deep? But at the same time, you want to pick the best player that's on the board when you go, right?
Or vice versa. When do they say, well, maybe we better get a defensive tackle or cornerback now because it may fall off, or safety now because the talent is really going to fall off later on. And if we don't get one now, we are out of luck later on.
All right, let's get to it. And we should know, too, this is pre-free agency, obviously, so team needs right now are relative. Team needs can change a lot once we get through the free agency period here, Tony. So we'll focus more here rather than on team needs. We'll focus on the players and how they fit because needs can obviously change once we get through that free agency period in the middle of March. All right, Titans number one, Tony. There's been a lot of noise that they are not looking for a quarterback, that they're looking to trade out of this pick, but you decided to go with the obvious here.
Yeah, it's pre-free agency. It's also pre-combine. And what's going to happen is a lot of things are going to happen at the combine. And if you look at history, if that first pick is traded, it's usually within a week or so after the combine, or a team moves up. You look when the Jets moved up to get Sam Darnold. You look at when the Bears, traded that pick for Carolina, who took Bryce Young. It's usually right after the combine. So if there is legitimate news about a team wanting to trade up to that first pick, I think, and the Titans moving down, that will come during the combine and kind of sift through who may be interested in it. I've mentioned the Raiders before. But I think, I just stuck with what I heard at the Shrine Bowl. Cam Ward's going to be the first quarterback off the board. And if the draft were held now, when I did this mock draft, the Tennessee Titans were going to would take Cam Ward with the first pick of the draft. I mean, I don't know that Will Levis is their future. Yeah, they have a lot of needs on the team. You have a lot of areas to fill. But sometimes you can't draft today for what you expect to happen next year. Well, we'll get our quarterback next year. Well, how do you know you're going to be in the top 10 next year? How do you know the quarterback's going to pan out next year? So that was why I selected Ward, or I chose Ward to the Titans with the first pick.
Yeah, I say if you like the player, don't wait on a quarterback, right? Take the swing when you can, because to your point, you don't know who's around next year or when you're going to be picking. I'm with you on all those things. Yet with the second overall pick, you do not give a quarterback to the Cleveland Browns, which are also a quarterback-needy team, given Deshaun Watson's injury situation.
Yeah, I mean, they are. But as I mentioned, I reported it at from the Shrine Bowl. Couple things. Number one, we're going to see what happens with that trade with Garrett Miles. Is he traded? Does that come to fruition? What do the Browns get in return for Garrett Miles if they ship him out? I'm sorry?
Miles Garrett. You said Garrett
Miles Garrett.
Miles.
I'm sorry. Hey, Miles Garrett. I apologize. And then the next thing is the Dion
Folks,
fact.
I'm going to put you inside Tony's head here. When we track these guys, a lot of times we do last name, comma, first name on our
Uh,
list. And I think that's what bit Tony there.
or Tony just has brain fog. So it's one or the other, you
I'm
know.
trying to give you an
Let's
excuse, dude.
let's be honest. And I'm not even. And I got it written here, and I'm not even reading it. But again, as I reported from the Shrine Bowl, there is a concern. Deion Sanders has said all along that there are going to be some teams that he's going to tell, don't draft my son, don't draft Travis Hunter. And the speculation is the Cleveland Browns could be one of those teams. Again, more will come out as we get closer to the draft, but that was the rationale behind this selection.
All right, let's go pick number 3 for the New York Football Giants. Tony, who do you have them picking, and what's your rationale?
Well, Shedeur Sanders. Obviously, they need a quarterback. They can't go into the season with the quarterbacks they have on the depth chart now. Maybe they sign somebody in free agency, Derek Carr, somebody like that. But still, you're going to need a quarterback for the future. He's got great upside. He does have a lot of holes in his game that we'll talk about in our combine preview. But I think it's a nice fit. They need a guy for the future. They need a guy who could potentially help them right away. I don't know that Shedeur Sanders is going to do that. And plus, go back to Deion would, a la Eli Manning, would probably love to have his kid playing in New York City.
Any thought on giving the Giants Travis Hunter, who you do have going to the Patriots at number 4?
I think it would be nice, but I think you'll be able to get a good receiver later on, maybe a good cornerback in the second round. I just think that the quarterback position is such a glaring hole for the Giants. They need somebody, whether it be a veteran, a rookie, to start in 2025.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, and then the Patriots, is this just best offensive player available to try to give Drake May as much help as you can?
Yeah, and also they could also need help at cornerback. As we'll talk about in our combine preview, Travis Hunter was designated as a cornerback, but he can do a lot of different things. And, you want to make Drake May more successful, give him more weapons. Also, you got to protect him. And I just don't think Will Campbell is worthy of going this early in the draft.
Fair point. And by the way, Tony's mentioned a couple times, our combine preview will air next Monday before everything kicks off at the combine. Then Tony and I will be back the following week to talk about everything that went down in Indy. All right, pick number 5, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Tony, you go with a very, very safe player, in my opinion. Mason Graham, defensive tackle out of Michigan.
Yeah, the Jaguars do not want to miss on this first pick. Now they have an offensive-minded head coach. Could it be Ted McMillan? Possibly. But I think the Jaguars have to get a safe pick in there. They can't miss. And Mason Graham is a guy that also fills the need because they need help on the interior defensive line. The other position that they could address is cornerback, but Mason Graham is significantly safer than Will Johnson.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, then pick number 6, the Las Vegas Raiders. You're not doing trades in this mock, by the way. We should make note of that. So no trades yet. We'll wait till we get through free agency and all that stuff before we start having fun with trades. And Tony and I will start doing every month or so a mock draft with the two of us on this show. Raiders, Ted McMillan. They traded Devontae Adams last year. They need a receiver. We'll see who the quarterback is, but at least they'll have somebody to throw to.
And he's just a phenomenal receiver. He's not a big play receiver, but he's a lot like Devontae Adams in that he's natural, he's fluid, he's a game-controlling wideout. The tape on McMillan is really impressive. He's not very fast. Now, I do think, as I've reported, that the Raiders will be in conversation to move up to get a quarterback because, like the Giants, they need a signal caller for 2025.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to the New York Jets at number 7. And you already mentioned the player that you have going to them, Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan.
Makes a lot of sense. DJ Reed, who's probably the Jets' best cornerback last year. I know I'll get backlash for that statement. He's not expected to be back. They bring in Aaron Glenn. What position did Aaron Glenn play? Right, cornerback, and it's a position of need. So I think it's a nice fit. Johnson does have some downside. Thought he played better in 2023 than he did in 2024. But he's tall, and you go back to that early film, and he was a lockdown corner.
And we'll talk about him in the combine preview as well. I have some questions there. Number 8, Carolina Panthers, the first edge player off the board. You consider him an outside linebacker as well. Jalen Walker out of Georgia.
I think Will Johnson would be a consideration if he's there, but Jalen Walker is a natural fit. And the more I watch Jalen Walker, and I'm pretty much done with my SEC film work, the more in love I fall with this guy. I mean, he's more than an edge rusher. I mean, he's a terrific edge rusher. And when you watch him on film, he's not just a guy who takes wide angles. I mean, he meets those tackles head on, and he will stand those tackles up, but he also gets tremendous depth on his pass drops. You can put him on the field on 3rd and 6, and you can either send him up the field as a pass rusher or have him cover the tight end in reverse. Play on the field is really impressive. We'll talk about something in our combine preview. The only really bad portion or kink in his game that I'm hearing from scouts.
All right, let's go to pick number 9, the New Orleans Saints. They draft a weapon in Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri.
Badly needed weapon. I mean, they need help on the offensive line, but this team has spent so much draft capital on the offensive line. At times, you got to stop the bleeding and say, just go with what you got or go a different direction. You know, they need another weapon there to match up with Chris Olave. Olave's had some injury concerns. Burden's a consistent receiver. He's a stout guy. He's got a bigger build than Chris Olave, so I think it's a good compliment to their former number 1 pick.
Then you have the Bears, Ben Johnson, the Lions' former OC, now the Bears HC, coming from a program in Detroit where they had a terrific offensive line. You have a young quarterback. No surprise that I'm sure they're thrilled that Will Campbell dropped all the way to them at 10 at LSU.
Yeah, I mean, you can move on from Braxton Jones. This is a new regime there. Caleb Williams had his issues last year. You got to protect him. You want your young quarterback to develop. You can't make another mistake as you have in the past with some of the early first-round selections that the Bears have made at the quarterback position. You got to get some protection in there for Williams.
All right, let's go to the next selection. The 49ers, they select Mykel Williams out of the University of Georgia.
Yeah, I think with the Niners, edge is a primary concern. I think Williams has got a lot of upside. He's an explosive guy. He's a good fit for the system because I like him in a 4-man front. I think it's a great pairing with Nick Bosa.
Okay, pick number 12, the Dallas Cowboys. And this is a pick I'm sure we're going to see a lot as the year goes along. Ashton Jeanty, running back out of Boise State. And this is one of those picks, Tony, where I kind of mentioned earlier, right? As great as Jeanty is, and I think he's very deserving of the selection, it's such a deep running back class. How early do you want to pull the trigger? If you think you can get another guy 30 picks later that's almost as good?
Go back to the Senior Bowl when I reported on Sportskeeda that the Cowboys really want a receiver with the early selection. I said in my mock draft that if a top receiver, a Luther Burden, I doubt if Ted McMillan falls to him, that would be their pick. They would jump on a receiver. Now, earlier this week, ESPN is reporting that the Cowboys would look to trade up to get a receiver. So I was pretty much on the mark. But since I'm not dealing with trades, I think Jeanty, who's one of the higher-rated players on my board, makes just too much sense. Unless there's a receiver available.
Surprising. I thought they might try to go offensive line again with the issues that they had last year, but they need weapons too. I think it makes sense. All right,
well, let me just address that. I mean, there's talk. And I reported this again on Sportskeeda from the Senior Bowl. They think that they have talent on the offensive line, but they're just not developing the talent.
Yeah.
So they want to get maybe better coaching, better offensive line coaching in there to basically develop the players that they're already on the depth chart.
Cooper Beebe, Tyler Guyton, a couple of those guys, among a couple other young guys at guard and center as well. All right, let's go next selection. Pick number 13, Miami Dolphins. Malachi Starks, safety out of Georgia, third Georgia player in the top 13.
Defensive tackle was a consideration here, but really Miami could use 2 safeties, and it's not a deep safety class. If you want a really good one, you better get him early. And Starks is an explosive defensive back. He's more than a safety. I mean, you can play him over the slot receiver. He'll do a good job for you. He's explosive against the run. So this was sort of where need fits best player available. Good for the Dolphins.
All right, pick number 14, the Indianapolis Colts. They go with a tight end, Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Surprised maybe to some people that he's the first tight end off the board. That's a conversation we could certainly have on another show. But Tony, you give Loveland another weapon to the Colts, who've been drafting receivers high, it seems like, for the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, and Malachi Starks would have been the pick here if I had not given him to the Miami Dolphins. And you're right. I mean, it's going to be a surprise to some, but you look at the system, you look at who the quarterback is, Anthony Richardson, and I think that Loveland is more of a downfield threat than Tyler Warren is. And I think he's a better fit because he's more of a pass catcher first, blocker second, and even a downfield threat, a better intermediate threat than Warren. Nothing against Warren. I know people's heads are going to explode, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on. I just think that Loveland is a better downfield threat and a better fit for the for their system. And I have Loveland and Warren rated very close together.
Yeah, Tony, so do I. I did, even though I was off last week, I had a week off. I wanted to catch up on some tape work, and I watched both tight ends back to back. I watched pretty much all their targets. I watched a lot of their run blocking in the game, in the run game. And to me, I'm with you. I have them I think 200s or something of a point apart from each other in terms of the grading scale that I use. But they're just different types of players, right? Do you want that? Darren Jeremiah tweeted this the other day, and I was kind of annoyed because I feel like that's something I wanted to talk to you about this week because I watched both tight ends, where he's kind of classifying his tight ends now. Are you a Gronk or are you a Kelsey? Colston Loveland's a Kelsey. Tyler Warren's a Gronk, right? Do you want the guy that's bigger, run after the catch, can run through you, or do you want the guy that's more of a fast route runner type that can get open and, win on the route tree? So I think they're both good players. It all depends on which style of tight end you're looking for. The F move tight end, or you're looking for the guy that's the Y that's going to play in the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, exactly. And block as well. And Warren's a much better blocker. I think what happens is, people see the highlights. They see Warren, at center, taking snaps, and they fall in love with him. But again, when you look at the fit, when you look at the ability to break it downfield, which Loveland has shown, and Loveland doesn't have a lot of good film from 2024 because he was injured. He had a shoulder issue. Plus, you had all that turnover at Michigan, which hurt him. So if you're just watching 2024, I can understand why people would like Tyler Warren more than Colston Loveland, but you got to go deeper.
And I'll say a bit about Warren, too. There's some highlight blocks on his tape where he makes some really nice blocks. He has some whiffs in there, too. So he needs to get more consistent in that area in terms of technique and things like that. But certainly just because of his size, he has much more upside at that spot as a blocker. But yeah, I think you're on the point there, Tony. Falcons, they're still in an never-ending search for an edge rusher, Tony. They try to find one with this pick with James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee.
And it is kind of funny, right? I mean, you got teams who are always looking for quarterbacks. You mentioned, the New Orleans Saints always selecting offensive linemen. And I think it's going to be a defensive-minded or a defensive-concentrated draft with the Falcons. And I think they go with James Pierce, Pierce is a terrific athlete. I mean, he's explosive. He can rush the passer. He shows a variety of moves. He gets out into space making plays. He shows ability in pursuit. He's got to get bigger, and he's got to get stronger. I mean, he looks like a thinner type guy. We'll see what happens at the combine, but I think this is a good fit for not only need, but the system as well.
All right, then the Cardinals, they need playmakers up front on defense. They try to select one here with Kenneth Grant, defensive tackle out of Michigan, the fourth Wolverine taken in the first 16 picks of the draft. They're at 25%. That's pretty good.
No, I didn't even count, but thank you for bringing that up. But again, I mean, another team that has consistently drafted in the front seven, took the kid from Missouri, Darius Robinson, a year ago. I think Grant is an outstanding fit for their system. I think Mason Graham is the safer pick, but when you look at the size, you look at the movement skills, you look at the athleticism, I don't think it's far-fetched to say that if Kenneth Grant continues to improve and he hits his upside, he could be as good, if not a better NFL player than Mason Graham.
That's a nice preview for what we'll talk about on the Combine show next week, because Kenneth Graham might blow up and own a good portion of that Combine. All right, pick number 17, Tony, Kelvin Banks out of Texas. Tackle, guard, it depends on what scout you talk to.
And the Bengals need both. So they need a left tackle. They need an offensive guard. Granted, he can't play both positions at the same time, but he's a real good player with a high upside. Just got to get his game back to where it was early in the season. You watch Kelvin Banks the early portion of 2024, he was so much better than he was later on when he struggled with a little bit of injury. But again, a good zone blocking offensive lineman, effective on the move, and can play or project to one of two positions, one of the most important positions, left tackle.
Pick number 18, Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver out of Ohio State. First Buckeye taken off the board, Tony. They might tie or set the record for most players drafted this year, breaking Michigan's record from last year. But their first player doesn't go off the board until pick number 18 to the Seahawks, who already have Jackson Smith-Njigba, another Buckeye, and DK Metcalf, but you wanted to give him another weapon.
Well, they may move DK, or there's rumors that they may move Metcalf in the offseason. We'll have to see what happens there. I think with Egbuka, this is a little bit earlier than I had him on my board. Offensive line is also in need for the Seahawks. I didn't see any offensive linemen really worthy of being selected at this point. I think with Egbuka, you're getting a guy who's consistent and safe. He's not spectacular, but he's the type of rookie who can start early in his first year in the NFL and produce. I don't think he'll ever be spectacular, but he's very dependable and reliable.
I picked number 19, the Buccaneers. They're trying to redevelop that defensive line. Trying to get an edge player here with Nick Scarton out of Texas A&M, Tony. He's a guy that I know I've talked to some people down at the Senior Bowl. He did not participate there because of injury. A lot of people thought he maybe put on some weight going to Texas A&M, and I'm curious to see what he weighs in down there in Indy at the Combine and just kind of what his body looks like.
Well, not only that, but what does he weigh in at and what are his testing? Because that's important. The guy puts on, 10, 15 pounds. Is he the same athlete with the testing that he showed on film? The Buccaneers have one of those teams that they can't seem to find the formula for the pass rushing, big pass rusher that they need. They've used a lot of early draft capital. Scarton he's very athletic on film. I mean, he's explosive up the field. There are times where they play him off the line of scrimmage on zone blitzes, and he moves around well, shows some ability in coverage, or enough that he's not a liability in coverage. And I like his upside. I think Scarton is a good player now that can be a real good player 2 or 3 years down the road.
All right, then we have the Broncos at 20, Tony. They picked Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State. Any thought here to maybe giving them a running back? They were kind of hunting and pecking for a running back. Do you think it was a little bit too early for that second back to go off the board?
Way too early for that second back. I mean, could they do it? It's Sean Payton. I mean, not a lot of people thought he was going to take Bo Nix as early as he did last year, and it worked out for him. So, yeah, could they go with an Omarion Hampton type at this selection? Possibly, because it's Sean Payton, but they also need a tight end badly. And I think Warren is a Sean Payton type of player, a lunch pail, punching him out type of tight end that can do a lot of things well.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to pick number 21, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They like to draft guys up front, Tony, on defense, and they get one here in Walter Nolan.
What do they do with the quarterback position? I think this is an area where Jalen Milroe could potentially be selected. But I think they like the big playmakers up front. That's what Walter Nolan is, especially on film. He flashed it during the Senior Bowl, and there were times during the Senior Bowl where, he was also stymied at the point of attack. But you get him playing at his best, and Walter Nolan is a guy who can play in a three-man front and still make plays.
All right, let's go to pick number 22, Josh Connerly. The Chargers, I assuming they're picking him to move him in the guard, right, Tony? Because they have 2 tackles in Alton Rashawn Slater already in hand.
And that's exactly where I have Matt. If you saw the mock draft, I have Josh Connerly at guard. I would have preferred a tight end here. If one of those 2 tight ends falls to the Chargers, I would have considered a wide receiver. But listen, what is Jim Harbaugh? What is his MO? His MO is our offensive linemen. He said offensive linemen are a weapon. You make Justin Herbert a better quarterback by protecting him. And that's what Josh Connerly does at guard for the Chargers.
All right, let's go to the Packers at pick number 23. Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. It's a very Packers pick. It's just a really good, solid football player. Probably not going to be a star, but he's going to be a good defensive tackle for you.
Would have liked an edge rusher here, but you look at Williams, what Williams has done throughout his career at Ohio State. Through the season last year, you watch him during the college football playoffs, which we talked a lot about on this podcast. He's an athletic big man, Going to be really interested to see how heavy I don't say heavy, what he weighs in at the during the combine, the workouts. They're saying 320, but if you watch the film, he doesn't look like a 320 pound defensive lineman on the field. He looks like he's a small, less the way he moves and his agility. So, and again, I think for the Packers system, this is an excellent fit.
All right, let's go. Pick number 24, the Vikings, Benjamin Morrison, cornerback out of Notre Dame. We got to find out about the medicals with him, Tony, at the comment. We'll talk about that on next week's show. But a very talented player that some people had projected in the top 12, top 10 before the season began.
Yeah, and again, the Vikings always looking for the cornerback. Can't get that recipe right. You said it correctly. I mean, you go back and you watch the film in 2022 and 2023, and Morrison was a lockdown corner. I mean, you couldn't be. They've got another budding cornerback at Notre Dame now. You got to look at the medicals, the hip injury. When is he going to be back? When is he going to be 100%? The film was also not that great this year. I mean, like Will Johnson, I think Morrison played his better football a year or so ago. That's also going to be something that's discussed.
All right, let's go to the Texans at 25. Derek Harmon out of Oregon.
I would have liked a bigger defensive tackle. I think Tyreek Williams would be in the conversation here, but they do need a defensive tackle. He's explosive. He's a playmaker. He plays with great leverage, and I think DeMeco Ryans, being a defensive-minded coach, will pound the table for him.
All right, let's go to pick number 26. Los Angeles Rams, linebacker, not an edge rusher, a linebacker, Jihad Campbell out of Alabama.
Well, they have some good edge rushers there already. They went with Jared first last year. You got the kid Young from Tennessee, who's a good player. So
they really need a regular. No, Tony, you're right. They have a desperate need for a linebacker. They traded midseason. Ernest Jones, right? They traded midseason this year. So
former South Carolina, right? And Jihad Campbell is the best off-the-ball linebacker in this draft. I mean, we talk about linebackers who can rush the passer. You watch Jihad Campbell, and he's a guy who's making plays sideline to sideline in pursuit. He's the guy that can drop in coverage. He's got some upside, needs a little polish on his game. But if you're looking for a three-down linebacker who, on 3rd and 6, can cover the tight end or cover the running back, it's Jihad Campbell, and that's what the Rams need.
See, this even happens to the Ravens in Tony's fictitious mock drafts. They sit at 27, and the guy that could be the best left tackle in the draft just drops to him in Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. Their starting left tackle is a free agent, the Ravens. We got to see if they bring him back. But if they can get Josh Simmons at 27, that is an absolute steal.
And with Josh Simmons, it'll depend on the medicals. I mean, when is he going to be ready to play? Are they going to? Josh Simmons' injury happened the middle of October. So when is he going to be 100%? How much of training camp is he going to miss? Is he going to miss any of training camp? But like you said, if Josh Simmons had remained healthy and basically was able to play past that Oregon game and assist Ohio State through the college football championship, he's probably the first. I don't think he's the first offensive tackle taken. And, we're maybe talking about the Patriots selecting him with the 4th selection of the draft. He was that good. But it's not just the injury. It's the fact that not playing the last 2 months kind of stunted the development that he had showed a year and a half prior at Ohio State.
Ronnie Stanley, that left tackle, that's a free agent. He's had some injury issues too, so that'll be a tough decision for the Ravens. Let's go to the Detroit Lions, Tony. And we saw when Aiden Hutchinson got hurt this year, they had a tough time generating pass rush without having to blitz a whole lot. So they're trying to solve that problem. They select Mike Green, the edge rusher out of Marshall.
And this is another area, do they look at their quarterback of the future? But Mike Green was just the higher rated than any of the quarterbacks on my board. Obviously, we saw what he could do at the Senior Bowl. We had talked about him on this podcast going back to September. He's an explosive edge rusher, standing over tackle out of a three-point stance. He's got to get a little bit stronger. He's got to get a little bit, add some bulk to his frame. That should come once he enters an NFL weight training program compared to what he was doing at Marshall.
Washington Commanders need desperately a help on defense, specifically in the secondary. They try to get some here in Siobhan Ravel out of East Carolina, Tony. If he was healthy, he could be a top 15 pick. He's not. Commanders get a potential steal here. When he was hurt all the way back, I think in September, right? So probably better chance he's ready to go by the start of the year.
I think it was early
Early
October,
October.
and it was a practice. It was an injury in practice. I believe, it was a non-contact injury in practice that happened. They took the kid from Mississippi State, Malcolm Forbes, who's not worked out, and I'm not surprised by that. I was never
And by
about.
the way, he's not even on the roster anymore. They cut him last year. So yeah.
Um, with Ravel, he's sort of a mini version of Josh Simmons, although he's not as far along in his game as Josh Simmons in the sense that he's got great measurables when you look at him. He showed a developing game. I was more impressed with him the beginning part of 2024 than I was in 2023. Showed the ability to make plays with his back to the ball. But again, you got to look at the injury. When is he going to be ready? And, not just when he's going to be ready health-wise, but when he's going to be ready on the field. Is he going to be able to carry that momentum that he showed during the early portion of 2024 through the 2025 NFL season?
And then back-to-back corners, Jahdae Barron out of Texas, Tony, at number 30 to the Bills.
Kerry Elam has not panned out for him. The kid from Florida, former first-round pick. Barron we'll talk about because I know people have questions about him. He's an opportunistic corner. Needs some work on his technique, but he is a guy that when the interception is available or when the ball's in the air, he's making plays on the ball. Not the biggest guy in the world, but a guy who just is a ball magnet.
All right, let's go to the Chiefs at 31. You watch that Super Bowl, they need offensive line help, Tony. Ariante Ursary out of Minnesota, big man, big enough to play tackle. It's just a question of foot speed.
And I said in my mock draft, this is a pure need pick. Depending on what Kelsey does, maybe tight end. They could need some help at receiver. But, you got Joe Thuney at left tackle. The kid from BYU has not panned out that they selected in the second round last year. Wayne Morris from Oklahoma has not panned out. They better, if you want Patrick Mahomes to have a long career and you want to win more championships, you better protect the quarterback. So this was a pure need selection. And as I said, sometimes the Chiefs are a bit unorthodox with their selection. Remember the kid from Kansas State that they took in the first round 2 years ago, and he's not panned out. So, it would not be surprising if the Chiefs went in this direction based on their history and the need.
And then the Eagles at 32, they select Armand Membo out of Missouri. I'm not sure he's going to get this far, Tony, given the dearth of tackles. But to me, this is a real smart move for Philadelphia, right? They have a need at right guard. Mekhi Becton's probably not going to come back. And Lane Johnson's probably going to retire in the next 2 years. So this could be almost like the Cam Jurgens situation, right? You start him off the guard, and then all of a sudden Lane Johnson retires, you shift him out to tackle, and you're good to go.
Right. Yeah, and people laugh when I said Jurgens wouldn't get past the Eagles that year in the draft, and he didn't. And look at the dividends. And we know one thing. Howie Roseman loves selecting offensive linemen. They do a great job developing their offensive linemen. We'll see if Memo gets there. I could understand why he would be selected earlier than this, especially after those measurements at the combine probably put a lot of people's minds to rest about his ability to play tackle. The question is, do you think he can play left tackle in the NFL, or is he strictly a right tackle? I would be leaning towards the latter, right tackle.
Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Football Giants. Draft season is brought to you by Moody's, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risk into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. All right, Tony, we got some questions in from the fans here. Let's get to them, and we'll do another couple of these after we get through the combine. This one from 1925 for, at 1925 Wrecking Crew. What's the top 3 areas of need where best player available could be in play? This is for the New York Football Giants, specifically at number 3, Tony. And, I think when you're talking about best player available for me that early in the draft, Tony, you're talking about one of the quarterbacks,
right,
which is probably more need than pure grade. But then you're looking at either Abdul Carter or you're looking at Travis Hunter. Those to me are the 3 spots where you're really making a call. Which quarterback do you like better? Then you have Hunter, then you have Carter. And to me, they're a tier above the next set of guys with, Mason Graham, Tech McMillan, and kind of that next set of players.
You'd like to throw offensive line in there because the Giants have struggled on the offensive line, but there's really Will Campbell is not worth the 3rd pick of the draft.
Yep, I'm with you 100%. All right, this one from Big Blue Huddle. Want to know what Tony is hearing about where and when. He said top 5 to 10. 10's a little tough. Where and when you think the top 5 quarterbacks in this draft will be drafted?
Well, just based on my obviously, Cam Ward is, I would say right now, 95% is going to be the first pick of the draft. Whether it's the Tennessee Titans, whether it's a team that trades up with the Titans, but I would be shocked if he's not the first selection of the draft. Shedeur Sanders, I mean, could he slide past the Giants? Possibly. You watch Shedeur Sanders, and we'll talk about this at the Combine. The fundamentals are not good, but he's incredibly athletic. He's got a lot of upside, and coaches are going to try and coach him to his best. That's why they're football coaches. But I would be surprised. I mean, I think it would be manna from heaven for the Raiders if Shedeur Sanders slid to 7. I don't think that happens, though.
All right, let's go to Marty Gennaro. Tony, what are your opinions on the 3 players coming out of Syracuse? Kyle McCord, Oronde Gadsden III, and then their running back.
LaQuint Allen.
Quinn Allen, thank you.
Right. I love 2 of them. I think LaQuint Allen and Oronde Gadsden are just insanely underrated. I mean, LaQuint Allen, he's a tough, between the tackles, downhill ball carrier, but he's also a sensational pass catcher out of the backfield. I mean, a sensational pass catcher out of the backfield. He'd be a good fit for the Miami Dolphins, who need a bigger, powerful guy to work with Achon, the kid from Texas A&M, the game breaker that they selected a couple years ago. And he's also, Allen is a terrific pass catcher out of the backfield. I think he's going to be underdrafted in the sense that he's probably an early day 3 pick who should be a day 2 selection. Oronde Gadsden, I just did my report on Oronde Gadsden, and I said it wouldn't shock me if 2 or 3 years down the road, Oronde Gadsden is the best tight end to come from this class. He's much more natural catching the ball than any of the top than Arroyo. He's as natural as Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren. He definitely has a speed advantage. I mean, he's a former receiver. His measurements at the Shrine Bowl were 247 pounds. Arms that were over 33 inches, hands that were almost 10 inches. And when we were at Shrine Bowl practice, I mean, he looked like a receiver playing the tight end position. Now he's got to learn.
He looked like his dad. He's the same.
He's got the bloodlines, right. Now he's got to learn to block, but he's 247 pounds. And I go back to what I said earlier, if you put on 10, 15 pounds, how do you move? He looked like he was a 230-pound, 225-pound, oversized receiver catching the ball, which is why I think he's going to be a day 2 pick. I have him as a second-round selection, but I think in time, wouldn't be surprised if he's the best tight end to come from the 2025 draft, if he's developed correctly, if they coach him correctly. Kyle McCord, I spent time with Kyle McCord at the Shrine Bowl. He's a good guy. He's an honest guy. We talked about his history with Ohio State. When you look at it from a physical point of view, Kyle McCord ranks with the top quarterbacks in this draft as far as his size, his arm strength, his ability to get the speed on throws. The thing about Kyle McCord that scares me is he never senses backside pressure. And he's very slow to move his head from the primary target. That was a big problem at Ohio State, which he kind of improved because Ohio State, he would just lock on to the primary target and not move his head. Sometimes those things can be coachable. I think Kyle McCord's done a great job this year. He rebounded well after a poor season at Ohio State. He rebounded well during the season. I mean, he had that 5-interception game against Pittsburgh. He came back. I think they won 5 of the next 6 games. He's got a lot of upside. I just think he needs a lot of proper coaching to get the bad aspects, staring down the primary target and not sensing the backside pressure out of the way. That can be tough, though.
All right, this one from Big Dogs 1318, Tony. If you're the Jets general manager, and Tony did not get selected out of that hiring process a couple weeks ago, Tony, my condolences to you. Will Johnson and Mason Graham are both available at 7, along with any offensive tackle you want in the draft. Who do you take and why?
I'm not taking Will Johnson there because, I mean, the Jets hopefully have their left tackle of the future.
Will Campbell. Not Will Campbell.
Will Campbell. I'm sorry. I'm not taking Will Campbell there because I don't know if Will Campbell can play right tackle. And the Jets hopefully have their left tackle of the future from last year's draft. I would lean towards Mason Graham, but I think with Aaron Glenn being a former cornerback and the needed cornerback with the DJ Reed leaving, I think that they would lean towards Will Johnson. And he says the general manager, they believe one of the reasons Moogie was brought in was because he could work with Aaron Glenn, sort of what you have going on in Houston with the head coach D'Amico Ryans and Nick Caesarea, where they work together. So I don't think in New York with the Jets anyway, it's going to be a situation where the general manager is basically going to have the final say. This is my guy. I don't care what the head coach wants.
And I think that's how it worked in Detroit too, right? The head coach and the GM very much in unison there with the players they selected, which is where Aaron Glenn came from. So I think that's another good way to see how that might work. All right. This one from at Eli Manning HOF. Since a player is more apt to be injured the more snaps he plays, what's the point of having Travis Hunter play on both offense and defense? If he sits due to injury and you had him playing both ways, don't you really lose two players as a result? So I'll also start by saying this. He's never going to be a full-time player on both sides. That's not going to happen in the NFL. Zero chance of that happening. It's impossible. Just the way meetings are structured, practice is structured. He can't practice both. So that's not going to happen. So I think full-time corner, part-time wide receiver is the most likely. Tony, I know you might see it a little bit differently. But look, you want your best players to help your team as much as possible. You can't run scared due to injuries.
I think what's going to happen is exactly what you said will happen. But I think if he really takes off at one position, if I'm wrong and he takes off as a cornerback, well, he's going to be more of a full-time cornerback than he is a receiver. And maybe they put him in special packages at the receiver position. Likewise, if he develops incredibly well at the receiver position, well, maybe he now is a dime back on occasion in the defensive backfield on certain situations.
All right. NY football Jinx fan, what are the differences, Tony, for you between Jack Besh and Isaiah Hodgins? They seem like similar players.
Yeah,
I think Besh is he's a better athlete and not as big as Hodgins. But they both have really good hands.
And they both have the same sort of mentality. It's sort of the same, I'm going to go get the football. You know, it doesn't have to be a perfect pass. I'm going to go up in a crowd and I'm going to come away with the reception no matter what. Sacrifice my body in a crowd or take a pounding and hold on to the football. They're also both very smart. You know, it's not just running routes. It's recognizing coverages, coming back to help the quarterback, following the quarterback across the field, which they both do well.
All right, this one from at @NHastings1. Is Abdul Carter closer to Micah Parsons or Kayvon Thibodeau? Heard from some Penn State fans, it's the latter, not the former.
Which Abdul Carter are we talking about? Are we talking about the Abdul Carter in 2024 or the Abdul Carter in 2023? I could understand that opinion that he's more Kayvon Thibodeau based off the 2024 film. Now, if you watch the show regularly, which we hope you do, you go back really when we started the season, I said all along, I thought they were doing Abdul Carter, and I said a couple times, a disservice, they being Penn State, by using him as a defensive end because he's so much more than that. You go, and if you just watch this year, you can make that comparison to Kayvon Thibodeau. You go back to 2023, where he was more of a pure linebacker who would occasionally rush the passer, not coming out of a three-point stance. You say, wow, Micah Parsons, because, go back to what I said about Jalen Walker during the mock draft. Can play off the line, sideline to sideline range, can play in coverage. We just didn't see that in 2024 because of the scheme that Penn State employed, and they used him up at the line of scrimmage, oftentimes out of a three-point stance.
All right, now we got last question at Mets Mavs 910. Strange offseason for Mets Mavs. They lose Luka Doncic, but they do get Juan Soto. So he's had some good, some bad there for Mets Mavs. DJ Daniel Jeremiah in his mock draft a few weeks ago had Will Johnson at 15, later than Jahdae Barron, and his blurb said that Johnson is polarizing amongst NFL teams. What Tony, are you hearing regarding Johnson, and what are the chances he's not the first cornerback taken off the board?
Well, he had some late season injuries, so you got to check that out. Nothing major. But go back to what I said about Abdul Carter. I mean, Johnson's 2023 film, and I even said this in the mock draft. His 2023 film is a lot better than his 2024 film. You watch 2024. He was backed off the line of scrimmage. He gave up a lot of underneath receptions. I think what's going to happen is the general managers, coaches, etc., will talk to the college coaches. So, and I know a lot of Giant fans are going to cringe when I say this name. When they talk to Wink Martindale to find out what was the situation with Will Johnson, was he just playing football, excuse the expression, half-assed? Or was it a scheme thing where you specifically had him backed off that far from the line of scrimmage? That will be the determining factor.
Tony, good times. We're going to have our combine preview next week.
Sounds good, John.
Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda. Check out all his work. I am John Schmeelk. It's draft season presented by Moody's. We'll see you next time, everybody.